I'm Joan Mansson of Mansson Fine Art, and thank you for joining me today as I share with you the development of a PanPastel portrait of Derek. Derek is a tuxedo cat. I'm going to start with the paws. Be sure I've marked out I'm using the round edge tool. And I just have to admit that when I approach a portrait of an animal or a person, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I stare at it, I study it, I look at the colors, I get the image on the paper, and still, I don't know what my approach is going to be. And usually it's the same, but generally you start with the background. Sometimes I don't, but generally you start with the background. And sometimes I would leave the white for last. And also, I'm finding my style within PanPastels, and I keep it painterly. And of course it's realistic, it's obviously representational. But it's not hyper-realistic, super-realistic, photorealistic. And occasionally by accident, particularly when I'm working with my watercolor pencils, they come out looking photographically real, and that's an accident. It's the way I work with that particular medium. But in working with the pastels, it's not quite, but almost like painting. And actually, when you're painting with white or black, the white isn't always white, and the black isn't always black, or usually. But I'm working with a toned paper, so I'm picking up the undertone with the white, creating a shadow of its own. And then I'll be going back and adding more highlight and more shadow as I go. I'm going to add touches of white over here. There'll be pink coming up, but I wanted to make sure when the pink goes down, the magenta, it'll be a little bit lighter wherever the white is. It'll make an easier highlighting for me. But then again, maybe not. I have refreshed the sponges on my sponge applicators, and I did that because the applicators were starting to crack from the sandy paper, and I am not the gentlest of users of these things. I try not to press too hard, but sometimes I feel as though I have to. Now, I'm going to bring in the Payne's Gray. I have a neutral gray tint and a neutral gray. I'm going to use a little bit of the neutral gray tint and a little bit of the neutral gray as well as the Payne's gray and the black to try to make room here. I'm going to use this small applicator. I'm going to get a fresh one. These are by Jen Davenport. She does a line of applicators that can be used with PanPastels and a line of her own pastels that she uses. These are about 4 inches long. You can get lots of these cosmetic sticks for a small amount of money if you get the little half ones. I find them too difficult to use for my hands. Not that my hands are so large, but because I have arthritis and holding that tightly is a little difficult for me. I'm going to bring in the pink. Now I'm working with that sponge applicator and adding more white to the ears. This area is sped up. It's in double time lapse. So it's not that I move that fast, but it's more that I don't think you really need to watch every single stroke that I make. But I do want you to watch the development, so I don't have it set that fast. I'm adding the white on the areas of the face, the pink. This is a light pink or the red tint, which has white added to it. At the factory, not by me. And we're adding some of that to the cute little nose. And now I'm bringing in more of the white. Whoops. I'm going to put a touch of the white here. Here. Fine detailing is going to be done using the pastel brush paint pencils, excuse me. And there is, oops, an area of white here. Okay. Now, we start with the gray tint. And of course the cat's not gray, but the reflected light lightens up the coat. Now I could of course just cover the entire cat with the gray and then come back and add the shadows of the Payne's gray and then the black. But I prefer to go this route. One, while I'm doing it, I'm outlining the contours of the body. Catching where the reflected light will be. And if I don't like it, I can cover it up, which happens frequently when I'm working. Bring up the Payne's gray. Look closely at the Payne's gray when you're using it, any Payne's gray. You'll see that it has a touch of the blue in it. But then blacks and grays are created by mixing the primary colors. And they're made warmer, cool by adding a bit more of one of the warmer or cooler primary colors. Now I'm adding the Payne's gray. This is a time-lapse portion. I just didn't think you needed to watch every single stroke. I'm just moving that applicator on its edge, adding the Payne's gray to the edge of the ear. We cover most of the body with the finger sponge. These are all from Soft Tools by PanPastels. You can look at the sales at your local drugstores or pharmacies or supermarkets for sponge applicators in the cosmetics departments. Art supplies are expensive, but if you can find inexpensive or less expensive options, it's well worth it. Now this is my first layer. There'll be more layer of black coming on because I'm working over a toned paper. I don't think this is blending as well as I would like it to on this paper. So I'm going to add the colorless blender to it. And we'll bring it in smoother, and then I'll come over it again with more black. But when I'm doing that, I'll be using one of the sponge applicators. Now the colorless blender is white, and it does add a light tint to whichever colors you're using. Now we're back to time lapse. Looks a little bit like an old-time silent movie, doesn't it? I'm using the blender, as I said earlier, and I'm mixing the black on top of that. It moves more smoothly onto this sanded paper. Now I'm using the round edge applicator to add black detailing around the face. The other applicators were just too large. And these sponge applicators are similar to brushes in the way they handle, and also to pencils. You can use the edges of them, or you can use the flat sides of them. And when they get too dirty, you can turn them over and use the other side of them. And then when they're too dirty or they start to tear, you just put a new applicator on them. They do sell replacement applicators if you're using these, so that's really not a problem. And again, these are soft tools, SOFFT. And you can get them in art supply stores, or you can get them on Amazon or Dick Blick or Jerry's Artorama. So I like, as I'm adding the black, the expression of Derek is starting to come to life for me. This is, for me, a cat with an attitude, a prince, lying on his cushions, watching his minions serve him, giving them orders with his mind, because he doesn't even have to meow unless he wants to exercise his vocal cords. And this is cats. I don't own cats, so I'm only familiar with them through the stories of friends about their animals and relatives. But I know that cats have a different view of the world. But he is a beautiful tuxedo. And he probably is a prince among cats. I'm using the applicator and applying it in such a way that I'm duplicating the movement of the fur. I'm bringing the edge to the paper and dragging it up and then moving backwards to forward so that the fur is overlapping, or the appearance of the fur is overlapping. There's no need to try to duplicate every single fur or try to give you the idea that that's what I'm doing, because I'm not. I just want the movement of the fur over the muscles of the body. And I'm building it up so that it becomes darker and darker. Now I'm selecting the pencils. I use Derwent pastel pencils because they happen to be the ones I like to use the best. There are many fine brands of pencils and you can use whatever it is that you prefer, although when you're working with the pastels, it's best that you're using a softer pencil. But again, this all depends upon how you like to work and how your techniques work. And I'm using the black and the cream, highlighting the eyes, making an outline to the eyes, adding the pupil. And the most important part of doing pastels, unless you don't care about representational art, is getting a good drawing. You really want to get a good drawing of your subject down. You want the eyes to be in the right place, the nose and the mouth to be in the right place, the ears in the right place, or it'll throw the entire expression off. And expression is the most important part of any portrait, human or animal, at least in my view. I could have made him fatter or skinnier. It wouldn't matter. I could have made him lighter or darker. It's the expression, as far as I'm concerned, that really counts the most. What I'm doing now in adding the white isn't to add the idea feel of fur, but to bring a few of those white furs up into the black fur, to see that overlap, that interaction between the various colors on the animal helps to make it look more realistic. If you have a more graphic style, you could certainly just have hard edges between the colors, and that would be perfectly fine because that would be in keeping with your style. But when you're working in a more painterly fashion, then you want the overlap of the colors of the furs. I'm adding a few little dots where there are white furs overlapping into the black fur, doing highlights around the eyes, making sure that they have the right twinkle. And again, I'm moving on to the paws and making sure that I have an overlap of the white and black fur so that it doesn't look perfectly even. And now I'm just adding a little shadow for the nails and around the paws on the fabric. And I'll hit that again. a little bit of the pink on the toes. And I'm using a blending stump here just to blend that in the background. Blending stumps are a wonderful tool to have. That's a size 5. You can use a 3 or a 5. I think you'll get the most use out of those sizes when you're working if you can only get a couple. But they sell them by the pack and you can get a variety of sizes. Always use the tools that help you and always use the size of tools that works best in your hand and with your technique. I have lots of tools, blending stumps, that I never use because I don't use that size. Okay, now I'm using the black around the edge of the ears to make the finer detail and bringing up fine hairs from the ears and blending back and forth with the flesh tone pencil, creating ridges and highlights within the muscles of the ear. I'm bringing that light color into the darker fur because the ear does come further down. And now I'm bringing the black pencil back up to work on the edge of the other ear and to work in the shadows. And of course, add those fine flicks of fur. Or on the belly. Just using a piece of glycine under my hand to keep me from getting oils on the pastel and from keeping me from smearing it. The PanPastels will smear, not as much as the soft pastels, but they will get on your hand. So just to be careful and not to move a handprint from one end of the picture to another, it's best to protect your piece of work with some piece of paper. Wax paper will do, paper towel will do. This glycine happens to come in between the pieces of the Pastel Mat papers that I use. And one of these pieces of paper works for scores and scores of images. So I've got a lifetime supply with just one pad of paper. I'm working on the background, the fabric that Derek is resting on. adding a few more shadows, making it sit back a little bit further, and then blending that in. I don't want it to be stark, but I do want there to be a greater division between the two levels of fabric. Derek was a very cooperative subject, and while this portrait could easily have taken me 4 or 5 hours, including the background, it was only 2 hours long, which is really very fine, and you can see how well they're looking there. He does look like his portrait. I'm just going to add a few more white whiskers to his face, because what is a cat without his whiskers? Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration. And if you'd like to see more of my videos, please click on the subscribe button and the bell button and give me a thumbs up if you like this video.